Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. I hope the change of season finds you well. Before we begin the review today, I have an announcement of my own. My second book, Hapless Homesteader, will be launching on October 1st. It is currently set to sell in ebook and in paperback form, and I will be working on an audiobook to be coming out with it soon. If you would like to see some of my own work, you can get that or battle games. Or if you simply want to critique my work, you are more than welcome to do that. Moving on. This week we are reviewing A Place Outside the Wild by Daniel Humphreys. Now before we begin on the review, I'd like to encourage everybody out there to get their own copy of this book, read it, and form their own opinion about it. What I like, others may not like, and vice versa. So let's begin with the recap, and we'll follow that up with what I like, what I didn't like, and my thoughts. So we begin with our main character, Miles Matthews, who is working 3 jobs. His main job is working in IT for a large pharmaceutical corporation, which he has unfortunately been cut back to 3 days a week. In order to sustain the lifestyle that he enjoys, he's had to take on 2 extra jobs. The first being with his Uncle Pete, and it's not entirely clear what it is his Uncle Pete's business is, but it basically amounts to Miles standing around all day. The second job is at a motel, where he simply works the front desk. A very similar situation, but feels a little bit less like mooching. It's during one of these days that he hears a scream coming from one of the rooms. One of the cleaning ladies is pointing to another of the cleaning ladies who's laying on the floor, convulsing, and eyes are going gray. This is also being watched by one of the unfortunate residents who caught the whole scene while in a towel. The convulsing nurse's eyes turn entirely gray and she attacks the other nurse, apparently attempting to eat her, and not in the fun way that happens in motel rooms. Miles, being an every man for himself kind of guy and realizing the poor guy in the bath towel ain't really going to be much of a help in the current situation, does what any good protagonist does. He turns around and he books it. Getting to his car, he starts to drive out onto the road where chaos is just basically unfolding, and a truck crash stops him from progressing much further, where he runs into a school friend named Marco, who is now a cop. Now we hit the time skip. I would have prepared a song for this, but I'm in the middle of a 120-hour work week and I just simply don't have the time. Apparently, society collapsed within 26 days of the initial outbreak. It is believed that this outbreak was caused by a flu that was going around known as the Brazilian flu. This book was written in 2017, so nothing to do with current events. But we conclude our time skip 8 years in the future, and Miles is now part of a town of about 200 people with no name. That is mentioned around this time and one other time in the entire book. Miles is the sheriff. He's married to his wife Trish, who is the doctor of the town, and they have a daughter together named Trina. The beginning of the story is simply Miles getting his daughter up for their day, getting her ready for school, and lots of talk about food. The food they're eating, what food's like now. Their pancakes use cornmeal, the type of food they grow. This goes on for a little bit, so I'm going to skip ahead, because our next little section is about scavenging with an individual named Charlie and his team. And this is a fun little section where we get to see how they sweep the different houses, scavenge for different materials, mark the doors, and the protocols they've developed over the last 8 years in order to preserve their safety in such a situation. It's a fun little part, but there's not much more that's covered other than that. After this scavenging, we then cut to a young man walking into a field looking for a zombie to shoot with his .22 rifle. Upon finding one, he plinks a few shots, but doesn't really seem to be doing much good. When Miles' uncle, which I will be calling Uncle Pete from now on because the word uncle and the word Pete put together just seem to work so well. Uncle Pete approaches and asks this young man, who is named Alex, coincidence, I know, why he skipped school to come out here and pop a few zombies. Alex really doesn't have a satisfying answer to this, and if I remember correctly, Pete starts giving him some advice on how to shoot a little better. He makes a deal with Alex that he should come up later that day to check out the crow's nest where Pete hangs out most of the time. and to learn a little bit about how to better take care of this zombie threat. We then get a cut to what I believe is probably one of the most interesting scenes at the beginning of the book, and that is we have two zombies walking down the road. I always do like a story where we get the perspective of the monsters or the aliens or the foreign thing that we are trying to fight. These two are a former farmer who is walking around in crumbling overalls and a female jogger, or what was once a female jogger, whose clothes are in much better repair, though still probably not something you'd want to salvage after 8 years of hard use. They run into another zombie who comes out of the local woods and is able to simply stop them. He examines them both and then directs the farmer to the woods from which he came and sends the female zombie on her happy little way right to our team of scavengers, which we had just covered earlier. Apparently this individual jogger was just a bit too used for this alpha zombie's taste. We then cut back to the town for Miles' day, and Miles is basically trying to catch a corn thief. Somebody broke into a greenhouse where one of the local farmers had been growing sweet corn. Now, I find it odd that you would grow corn in a greenhouse, but that's a thing for another time. Miles ends up finding the culprit in a barn that was converted into individual apartments. The individual who stole the corn is not particularly bright, but that's all there really is to this little segment. We then cut to Miles' wife, who is conducting surgery. I believe it's referred to as an appendectomy. She's removing some unfortunate soul's appendix. And it's through this that we not only get a wonderfully gritty look into what is required to remove someone's appendix and the doctor's feelings on what the most difficult parts of surgery are, but we learn a bit through Trish's internal monologue about their lack of medical supplies and their hope to be acquiring some soon. Which leads us to our medical warehouse raid. You'll have to forgive me, there's a lot of characters in this book, and I can't remember all of their names, even some of those that make it all the way to the end of the book. But this team is at this medical warehouse that's a great deal farther than most of the salvaging teams go. And they have a long list and 2 large trucks, and they hope to fill it up with enough medical supplies to last them for quite a long while. It's after they break up in the warehouse and they start searching that one of them reveals that he's actually a secret deputy for Miles. And his reason for being on this trip was to hopefully find the individuals who were supplying some of the much-needed drugs to meth cooks who have been providing meth to this small town of about 200 people. Because apparently you can destroy almost all of society, but the war against drugs just never quite ends. The deputy does find that it is the leader of this group who has actually been the one supplying the much-needed medicine in order to make the meth. The deputy attempts to arrest him, but it turns out that it wasn't just the leader who was in on this. And he is set upon by, well, the leader's second-in-command. Just as the leader and his second-in-command are discussing the accident that's going to take care of this deputy, because after all, they're in a world full of zombies, who's going to question if one more person just happens to disappear at a very dangerous job? They're welcomed by some weird arrhythmic slapping and screaming. And it turns out that a horde of particularly well-off zombies have entered the building. The deputy, thinking fast, climbs up the shelves and manages to make it onto the roof before any of the others can. When he makes it to the edge of the roof, he is greeted by an unending wave, just a sea of gray bodies. Apparently, this is the zombie hotspot in this town. We then leave our unfortunate deputy, and we come back to the crow's nest visit in the town. Alex, the young lad who was skipping school, is now being run through a hazing of sorts by Pete, who is testing how good his aim is, how good his sight is, and allowing him to plink off with his gun. This gives Alex a great little thrill that he finally found something he might like to do when he gets older. To which Pete responds, well, if you want this job of sniping zombies, you're going to have to stay in school and learn your geometry and trigonometry. To which Alex reluctantly agrees. And to an extent, I agree with Alex. Trigonometry kind of sucks. But once you got it, so hang in there, little guy. Well, all of this kind of comes to a halt the moment the military shows up. About 8 years too late. And they want to talk with Miles Matthews, our main character, about a door they're having trouble opening. This will bring you to just shy of the halfway point of the book, and I'll explain why I went so far later on. So let's get into what I liked. First of all, the guy who wrote this, I'm pretty sure is former military because this guy knows guns. I mean, this book goes into some depth about the various different guns they have, the ones they find, the ones they need. Some pieces I'm sure he put in there just because he'd like to see them or like to have them. The different ammo types for the different calibers, different weapon accessories, different tactics. He actually goes so far as to include the thoughts of reloading when in a hostile situation, which is a nice touch I don't think that a lot of other books use. I also liked how basically everybody in the town had acclimated to a life of, well, a life of being quiet. They whisper almost everything. They over-grease everything to avoid excess noise, including the door hinges on cars. In fact, most of the things about the world building I kind of liked. I did like that they're going into some antiquated technology like the windmill water pumps to make sure the water stays flowing and to conserve electricity. Just some of the general little touches. Another little side note is that I like that the zombies ended up eating almost all the livestock. Basically, the zombies were just going after whatever they could catch, which is a good touch. I don't think I've seen that too often in a zombie story. I also liked that, and this is just the lightest touch against a spoiler. There's a part in the story that touches on the Georgia Guidestones, which, as most of you know, no longer exist. And I thought that was a good touch for a zombie book. And the zombies themselves, I have kind of a like-dislike relationship with. And again, another spoiler, so 3, 2, 1, skip ahead. The zombies have a sort of hive mind, which I think makes them feel more threatening. It certainly helps a great deal in building them up as a threat. But with that being said, that's going to slide us right into our dislikes. And it's also going to start with the zombies. Because, and again, spoiler alert, 3, 2, 1, skip ahead. The zombies are advancing. I've seen this in a couple of other stories, but I feel that once you get a zombie using tools, it's not exactly a zombie anymore. That might be something he's going to cover in later books. This book is again from 2017. I believe he's written more in the series, but it's just one of those things that makes it feel a little less like a zombie book. Now we're going to get into probably what is my biggest gripe of the book, and what I think is one of the biggest points against it. I had to do the audiobook because I have not been able to sit and read for these past 2 weeks, mainly due to work-related stuff, but I have enough downtime where I can listen to a book. So this is going to be the first book that I review that I have gone through the audiobook, and that might have been the wrong way to go. The narrator on this book is slow. Now, when I say slow, understand where I'm coming from. I already talk fairly slow as far as I'm aware, and I had to crank up the speed on this to 1.2 to get this guy to sound like a normal, slow-talking person. He drags everything out. But that's not my biggest gripe. There are extra takes left in from when he had to change a line, and I understand that making an audiobook is hard. I've done it myself. And if you miss one, it's forgivable, but I think I ran across 3 in this whole book. Now, granted, the book is 21 hours as an audiobook, so maybe you could forgive it on that. But the one thing I can't forgive is in chapter 10, near the end, I got a loud ear-piercing shriek of some sort. It was very mechanical. and I'm fairly certain it came from the audiobook itself, mainly because I was listening to it on my phone with earbuds and immediately had to yank them out, but I wasn't too keen to go back and investigate. Now we're going to move from my gripes with the audiobook to some of the things I didn't like about the book in general. Now, I said in my like section that I liked the world building, but that comes with one great big asterisk, and that is the first half of this big book is world building. Pretty much the entirety of the first half of this book. For example, I think we get 3 or 4 different characters complaining about how mundane their meals have become because they've eaten the same thing for 8 years. And I get why you might want to have maybe 2 different characters go over something. The first time to let them know the general census, the second time to let them know, hey, maybe some people are more okay with this, or maybe they have a different objection. Usually 1 time is enough, but I think it was done 4 times, and that's just a bit too much for such a mundane thing. Also, while I really like the touches of telling us how their whole agriculture thing works and all this other stuff, I feel that it was just a bit too much fluff. And by a bit, I mean, first of all, I believe the entire flashback sequence at the beginning of the book that covers Miles' job was probably entirely superfluous. The extended covering of the agriculture and the farming and the different greenhouses and the fields and all the cows could have probably been cut down tremendously. In fact, I think that the first half of this book probably could have been cut in half. Another little problem I have is some of the lesser characters are difficult to tell apart. They feel kind of stiff, and at times they sound like other characters. Now, when you have a large cast of characters, it can be difficult to make them feel like individuals. I get that. But this is a camp that is basically run by people with a military background. Almost everybody there, aside from a few characters, feels very military. And so it can be easy for them to just bleed together. And it wasn't until the end of the book that I was really able to start telling them apart. And it's when I felt like they started to develop their own voices. But we're talking about 16 to 18 hours into a 21-hour audiobook. That is too far, I think, for your characters to start feeling different. Another problem I have, and this is just a me thing, not really anything against the book, is I feel that the sheriff, husband, wife, doctor combination in these post-apocalyptic stories is just a bit overused. I believe The Walking Dead did something similar, and though I'm not a connoisseur of zombie or post-apocalyptic stories, I feel I've seen this trope way too many times. And I could be entirely wrong, but I just feel like I've seen this too often. Something I feel that could have been entirely left out of the story was the town's name, Ark. And I use Ark for lack of a better term. Near the beginning of the book, it is revealed that the town has not been given a name in the past 8 years. And there's been numerous debates, people give joking suggestions. A lot of people don't think there's anybody else out in the world, so why should they even bother naming the town? And at the end of the book, they name the town. And by this point, I had completely forgotten it was a controversy. I mean, lots of people have died, there's been a lot of crazy stuff, a lot of developments that just completely overshadowed this. And for it to come back at the end and the name that was chosen just, it literally stopped me, and it diminished a great deal of the goodwill that the second half of the book had built up, just because it felt trite and really out of place, but simultaneously cliche. It's very hard to describe, but it's the last word of the book, and when I heard it, I literally stopped and went, ugh. And that is not what you want for something that's going into a series. Now let's get into my thoughts. First of all, this is a long book, and I get that you want a long book with a lot of characters, but it does feel overly long. A lot of stuff probably could have been cut. I feel this book probably could have been done in maybe 500 pages. I know that on its site it says it's 700. I think a lot of fluff could have been cut. A lot of things could have been condensed, and we could have had a little bit less tell and more show. Now, that's not to say that some of the tell wasn't interesting. It was. I really liked the world building. I liked the little colony they made. But I felt it probably would have been better to have a bit more show, to save a little bit of it for later, maybe reveal it as it was necessary. Next, it's very obvious that the guy who wrote this is a bit of a gun nut, and I do believe guns are necessary for a post-apocalyptic setting. I would be interested to see how this individual does with military fiction, but I'm not sure how he did with the zombie apocalypse setting. I have very, very mixed feelings about this book. Which leads me to, would I recommend it and to who? And this is a very tough question. Most of the people who I make recommendations to aren't really looking to read long books. And most of the people I know, at least that I know of their book choices, don't really go for the post-apocalyptic zombie fiction. And that being said, for the first half of the book, while there were little bits that I enjoyed, and the second half of the book, there were actually parts that kept my attention, unfortunately, for a lot of this book, I was bored. Now, that is also keeping in mind that I'm not a fan of the zombie apocalypse genre. I feel it's a bit overused, and for personal reasons, I don't pursue it. And this is a book I chose at random, partially because in choosing my books at random, I want to choose one that has lower numbers of reviews and one that has higher numbers of reviews. And while I'm truthful about my opinion, I don't think it's really going to change anyone's minds. If I remember correctly, this book already has 300 plus reviews. People seem to generally like it. I didn't have as much fun as I was hoping I would. It sucks to be me sometimes. So I'm not sure I could really recommend it to anybody. But here's another question. It is a series. Would I pursue it to see what happens? And possibly. The premise is not one that I like over much, though I do like that the military was one of the things that survived. And I do like that that plays a major angle and that they know who caused the zombie outbreak. It would be interesting to see how it plays out with the remnants of the government, with the resources that the government stocked away. I could certainly see myself picking this up, but probably not right away. If you have a high tolerance for fluff, at least at the beginning, sure, pick it up. It's at least interesting. I can't say it's a bad book, but if it were something I were going to pick up just for me, I probably wouldn't. But with that, I wish you all good luck. Thank you for listening to my review. If you have any books that you would like to hear my take on, please leave them in the description. I do tend to favor indie authors over conventionally published, but I will read whatever I find interesting or whatever captures my fancy. If you would like to read, review, or criticize my own works, I will include a link in the description. Also, please keep the comments civil in the comments section. Also, if you enjoy what I do, please consider giving this video a like, sharing my work, or subscribing to my channel. Thank you.